There's something profoundly revealing about presence. You see, when two people are connected, you don't need constant words or dramatic gestures to feel it. It's in the way someone looks at you, in the softness of their tone, in how they lean into your presence rather than away from it. Presence is a kind of silent devotion. It says, I am here with you, fully. And that is precisely why its absence is so noticeable. When a woman has been with someone else, even if she says nothing, her energy tells the story. It's not about paranoia or suspicion. It's about learning to trust what your body senses long before your mind has found the logic. Emotional disconnection is subtle, but it's impossible to hide for long. She might be sitting next to you, but her attention is elsewhere. Her eyes wander more. Her laughter doesn't land the same way it once did. The warmth that used to feel effortless suddenly feels calculated, or worse, absent altogether. We underestimate how much of relationships live in this invisible field of energy. Call it intuition, call it body language, call it resonance. It's that space where authenticity either thrives or dies. When someone has shifted their emotional investment away from you, it's like their presence fractures. You're with them, but you're not with them. Something is missing. This is where men often fall into confusion, because the words might remain the same. She'll say, I'm fine. She'll still respond, still go through the motions. But it's no longer infused with the same spirit. And men who rely only on surface-level signs miss this deeper shift. Presence cannot be faked, not consistently. We are wired to sense authenticity, even if we can't explain it. That's why when you feel uneasy, when you feel that something is off, you're usually right. Philosophically speaking, presence is one of the most intimate gifts we can give another human being. To give someone your presence means you are attuned, attentive, and emotionally invested in the moment you share. Betrayal isn't just about the physical act of sleeping with someone else. It's about withdrawing presence from the relationship. It's the silent but undeniable confession that your energy is no longer singularly dedicated, and that disconnection is often felt before the story comes out in words. Think about it. When someone is excited to see you, they light up when you enter the room. Their energy opens, their face softens, their voice carries warmth. When that shifts, you notice it. Maybe she doesn't look up from her phone as quickly. Maybe the conversations feel shorter, more perfunctory. Maybe her laughter feels forced, like she's giving you the echo of what used to be natural. These are not accidents. These are the micro signs of disconnection, the subtle indicators that her emotional presence has been diluted. And here's what's important: disconnection doesn't always announce itself dramatically. It rarely shows up as silence or cold rejection right away. More often, it leaks through in micro absences: less enthusiasm, less eye contact, less curiosity about your day. This is how emotional energy betrays itself. Because intimacy thrives on attention, and attention cannot be divided without consequence. On a psychological level, this happens because our emotional resources are finite. When someone invests deeply in another person, whether emotionally, physically, or both, they naturally pull some of that investment away from their existing partner. It isn't always intentional. It's the economy of emotional energy. We cannot give our full presence to two places at once. The human psyche reveals its priorities by where it offers attention and warmth. And yet many men dismiss these early signs, either because they don't want to face the truth or because they've been conditioned to ignore their intuition. They rationalize, she's just tired, she's stressed, she has a lot on her plate. And sometimes that's true. But often, what you're sensing isn't exhaustion or distraction. It's disconnection. It's her presence withdrawing. Even while her body remains in the room, There's a reason betrayal cuts so deep. It's not only about the body, it's about presence being gifted to someone else. Presence is sacred. It's what makes intimacy feel alive. Without it, everything else is mechanical. And that is why you, as a man, must learn to notice the difference between when someone is with you physically and when they are with you emotionally. I want you to think about how powerful this awareness is. It's not about accusing. It's not about paranoia. It's about respecting yourself enough to trust what you feel. Because the body doesn't lie. Your nervous system picks up on things before your brain has the words for them. That discomfort you feel when something is off, it's not random. It's not weakness. It's your intuition signaling that presence has shifted. And here's the hard truth: when presence leaves, love is already unraveling. Love can survive distance, it can survive conflict, it can even survive mistakes, but it cannot survive sustained disconnection. Because without presence, there is no intimacy. There are only two bodies coexisting, while the soul of the relationship fades away. So if you notice this shift, don't ignore it. Don't convince yourself it's nothing. Pay attention. Presence is one of the greatest indicators of truth in relationships. It tells you more than words, more than promises, more than explanations. Because someone can say, "I love you," but if they're not present with you, the words are empty. Presence, or the absence of it, is the ultimate truth. And so, when you sense that absence, when you feel her energy slipping away, remember this: your role is not to beg for her presence back. Your role is to honor yourself enough to recognize the truth of what you feel. Because the deepest betrayal isn't that she gave her body to someone else. The deepest betrayal is that she gave her presence to someone else while sitting right in front of you. That is the wound men feel most deeply, not the physical act, but the silent confession of disconnection. And once you learn to recognize it, you'll never be blind to it again. Because at the end of the day, presence never lies. If presence reveals the truth on an emotional level, the body speaks it even louder on a physical one. Human connection is not only about words, it's about the countless nonverbal cues that communicate affection, desire, and closeness. And when a woman has shared intimacy elsewhere, you begin to feel a fracture in these cues. The body that once reached for you instinctively may now hesitate. The eyes that once softened may now glance away. The rhythm of physical closeness no longer flows with the same ease. We often believe that intimacy is about grand moments, long nights together, romantic gestures, or passionate encounters. But the truth is, intimacy lives in the smallest details. It's in the way she touches your arm when she laughs, the way her hand lingers on yours, the way her body naturally gravitates closer to yours without effort. These are the signs of genuine desire and emotional safety. And when they change, you can feel it immediately, even if you can't always articulate why. There's a difference between closeness that is natural and closeness that is performed. Natural intimacy flows effortlessly. It feels alive, responsive, almost childlike in its spontaneity. Performed intimacy, on the other hand, feels rehearsed, calculated, or distant. When a woman has been intimate with someone else, this shift often shows itself in how she interacts physically. Maybe she avoids prolonged eye contact, as if it reveals too much. Maybe she becomes less affectionate, less playful, less receptive to touch. Or perhaps she tries to overcompensate with affection that feels just a little too mechanical, a little too deliberate. Our bodies carry memory, and they carry guilt. When intimacy is shared elsewhere, a woman may unconsciously withdraw from physical closeness with you, not necessarily out of malice, but because her body is negotiating the conflict of dual connections. Physical distance becomes the body's way of protecting itself from exposure. Even if the words coming out of her mouth say, "Everything is fine," Her body language whispers another story. One of the most powerful indicators is how she receives your touch. When someone is emotionally connected, touch is met with openness. The body softens, it leans in, it responds. But when there is disconnection, you'll feel resistance. It might be subtle. Her body stiffens slightly, she shifts away, or she doesn't engage in the same warmth. This isn't something you can fake for long. The body betrays what the mind is trying to conceal. This is where men must develop discernment. Too many men ignore these changes, telling themselves not to overthink it. But noticing these shifts isn't about paranoia. It's about respecting the intelligence of your nervous system. Your body can feel when closeness is no longer mutual. Your spirit knows when touch no longer carries the same weight. And the moment you begin to rationalize those changes away, you lose the ability to trust yourself. Philosophically, intimacy is sacred because it requires vulnerability. To touch and be touched is not just physical. It's the ultimate expression of openness. That's why betrayal in this area feels so raw. It's not only that someone else had access to her body, it's that the language of intimacy, the softness that once belonged to you, has been translated elsewhere, and even if she tries to bring it back to you, the energy has shifted. You can feel the difference between being chosen wholeheartedly and being chosen half-heartedly. What makes this so complex is that many women don't want to admit this shift to themselves. So they may try to maintain physical closeness with you, but their body gives them away. The timing feels different. The enthusiasm is muted. The intimacy is present in form but absent in depth. You can feel when affection is obligation rather than overflow. You can feel when passion is replaced with politeness. And that difference, subtle as it may be, speaks volumes. This isn't about demonizing women or shaming them. It's about recognizing the reality of human behavior. When someone has shared intimacy with another person, they can't help but bring back the imprint of that experience. It changes how they move, how they respond, how they carry themselves around you. And if you're honest with yourself, you can feel it. You don't need a confession. You don't need proof. The proof is in the way intimacy itself has transformed. Men often ask, but what if I'm just imagining it? What if I'm overthinking? And I always say there is a difference between anxiety and intuition. Anxiety is noisy, frantic, full of fear. Intuition is quiet. It doesn't yell. It doesn't dramatize. It simply knows. When the way she kisses you feels different, when her embrace feels distracted, when the warmth of touch feels diminished, that isn't paranoia. That's your body recognizing what her body is already revealing. The tragedy is that many men stay silent in these moments. They sense the shift, they feel the coldness, but they suppress their instincts for the sake of peace. They would rather not confront the truth. But here's what you must understand: avoiding the truth doesn't protect you from pain, it prolongs it. By ignoring the signs, you teach yourself not to trust your own perception, and a man who cannot trust his own perception becomes weak, dependent on the words of others rather than the evidence of his own experience. So what do you do when you notice these shifts? You don't chase, you don't beg, you don't accuse recklessly. You simply stand in the authority of what you feel. You acknowledge that intimacy has changed, and you allow that truth to guide your choices. Because intimacy should never feel forced. It should never feel like you're convincing someone to receive you. The beauty of real intimacy is in its authenticity, and the moment it disappears, pretending otherwise only erodes your dignity. When a woman has been with someone else, the body speaks before the mind admits it. You will see it in her touch, her distance, her reception of closeness. And when you recognize that, the most powerful thing you can do is trust it. Because the body never lies. At the end of the day, You deserve intimacy that feels alive, not intimacy that feels rehearsed. And if you sense that the warmth you once had is gone, don't settle for its imitation, because counterfeit intimacy is worse than no intimacy at all. After presence fades and intimacy shifts, what comes next is often even more telling. Behavior begins to change, and it's not always in loud or obvious ways. More often, it shows up in inconsistencies, the small cracks in her story, the sudden explanations that feel unnecessary, the subtle contradictions that reveal something isn't aligned. Human beings are creatures of pattern, and when someone breaks their own rhythm, it's usually not by accident. This is where rationalizations enter the picture. When a woman has done something she doesn't want to reveal, she often feels the need to compensate by explaining more than usual. She may justify her actions before you even ask. She may offer details that weren't required, and in doing so, she unintentionally highlights the very thing she's trying to conceal. These are subconscious attempts to soothe her own guilt and manage your perception at the same time. Let me give you an example. If someone comes home late and they simply say, "I got caught up at work," that's normal. But if they add layers of detail, "Oh, I stayed late at the office because Sarah needed help with her presentation, and then I had to drop by the store, and the traffic was insane," it can feel like too much. The excess of detail is not always about clarity, it's often about covering tracks. The mind, when burdened with guilt, tries to construct a narrative that sounds airtight. But the irony is, in trying too hard to sound believable, the story begins to sound less natural. These inconsistencies are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are as simple as a shift in priorities. She suddenly becomes protective of her phone, turning the screen away without even realizing it. She becomes more private, less willing to share her day in the same effortless way she once did. Or she swings to the opposite extreme, suddenly being overly communicative, telling you every little detail, not because she wants connection, but because she wants to distract you from noticing the real absence beneath it all. Psychologically, what's happening here is a clash between guilt and self-preservation. When someone acts outside of their own moral compass, they experience inner conflict. To resolve it, the mind tries to create balance by rationalizing, "It wasn't that serious. It just happened once," or "I can still keep everything under control." These rationalizations might calm her internally, but externally they manifest as unusual behaviors: defensiveness when questioned, irritation over small things, or exaggerated reassurances that don't match the situation. One of the most striking signs is unnecessary defensiveness. If you ask a simple question like, "Where were you?" and the response is sharp, defensive, or overly emotional, that's not a normal reaction. A person who has nothing to hide answers simply. A person who feels exposed reacts disproportionately. The defensiveness is not about your question. It's about the fear that you've touched too close to the truth. Another pattern is inconsistency in emotional availability. One day she's overly sweet, affectionate, and attentive, as though making up for something. The next day she's distant, distracted, or irritated. These fluctuations are not random mood swings, they are the natural byproduct of divided attention. When someone is managing two emotional realities, they cannot maintain steady consistency. The guilt pulls them one way, the secrecy another, and the result is a roller coaster of behavior that you can feel. Philosophically, this points to a deeper truth. The human psyche longs for congruence. We are at peace when our actions align with our values, when our inner life and outer life reflect one another honestly. Betrayal creates dissonance, and when a woman tries to maintain two truths at once, that dissonance leaks into her behavior. It cannot be hidden forever because the soul craves integrity, even when the mind tries to conceal the lack of it. The tragedy is that many men notice these inconsistencies but choose to ignore them. They tell themselves, "She's just stressed," or "I'm overthinking," and sometimes, yes, stress explains a lot. But if these changes coincide with other signs, the absence of presence, the shifts in intimacy, then it's not just stress, it's a pattern. And when patterns emerge, you must pay attention. This is where a man's strength is tested. Do you trust your perception, or do you silence yourself for comfort? Because here's the reality. When you excuse too many inconsistencies, when you swallow too many rationalizations, you slowly erode your own sense of truth. And a man who loses touch with truth loses his foundation. He becomes fragile, dependent on illusions, rather than anchored in reality. Notice also how rationalizations aren't just for you, they're for her. She isn't only trying to convince you, she's trying to convince herself. The stories she tells, the excuses she makes, the sudden explanations, they are attempts to reduce her own cognitive dissonance. It's her way of saying, if I can explain this well enough, then maybe it isn't so wrong. But deep down, the soul knows the difference between justification and truth, and that inner knowing is what creates the very inconsistencies you notice on the outside. So what do you do when you sense this? You don't need to interrogate every detail. You don't need to police her every move. Instead, you pay attention to the alignment between her words and her actions. You listen not only to what she says, but to how she says it. You notice the tone, the timing, the energy behind the explanation. Because truth is simple, but lies are layered. And the more layers you see, the more likely it is that something deeper is being concealed. At the heart of it, the question isn't just, is she hiding something? The deeper question is, do I trust myself enough to recognize when behavior doesn't align? Because betrayal doesn't just test the relationship, it tests your ability to stand in your own perception of reality. And the most empowering choice a man can make is this: to stop ignoring the contradictions he feels, to stop gaslighting himself into believing the rationalizations offered to him, to honor his own awareness instead of outsourcing it to someone else's excuses. Because the truth is, love cannot exist in the midst of constant rationalization. Love thrives in clarity, in alignment, in honesty. When behavior becomes inconsistent and stories become excessive, that's the signal that love is being replaced by performance. And once you recognize that, you must decide, will you settle for performance or will you demand authenticity? At the end of the day, inconsistencies are not just mistakes, they are confessions. And the sooner you trust yourself to hear them, the sooner you reclaim your power. Because the greatest strength a man can have is not in ignoring what he sees, but in honoring the truth that is already in front of him. If presence reveals the shift in energy, and intimacy exposes the shift in the body, and inconsistencies betray the mind's attempts to cover the truth, then what remains is perhaps the most subtle, yet the most piercing sign of all: the language of comparison. And this language doesn't always come in words. Often it's communicated through silence, through dissatisfaction, through the small but undeniable ways in which you begin to feel like you're being measured against someone else. The human mind is wired to compare. Whenever we experience something new, we automatically weigh it against what we've known before. This isn't unique to women, it's universal. But when a woman has been with someone else, this instinctive comparison becomes charged. It shows up in the little things: her sudden disinterest in what once excited her, her criticisms that seem to come out of nowhere, or her silence where there used to be admiration. She may not say, "He did this, and you don't," but the shift in her attitude makes you feel it. One of the clearest ways this shows up is in dissatisfaction. Perhaps she used to appreciate your gestures, no matter how small. A simple dinner together was enough. But now, suddenly, it isn't. She seems less impressed, harder to please, quicker to highlight what's lacking. It's not that you've changed, it's that her internal reference point has. Once a new experience is introduced, the brain can't help but weigh it against the old, and that comparison creates dissonance. Another way comparison emerges is through criticism. A woman who has shared intimacy elsewhere may begin pointing out flaws in you that were never an issue before. She may say you're not attentive enough, not passionate enough, not this or that. On the surface, it might sound like a call for growth, but underneath, it's the echo of contrast. She's not only responding to who you are, she's responding to the shadow of who she has recently experienced. And whether she admits it or not, that comparison shapes how she interacts with you. But perhaps the most painful form of comparison is silence. When someone has experienced something new, they sometimes withdraw because they no longer know how to reconcile what they feel. She may not criticize you directly. She may not verbalize her dissatisfaction, but the silence itself becomes telling. Where there was once enthusiasm, now there is quiet. Where there was once affirmation, now there is a void. And silence in this case is not neutral. It's heavy. It carries the weight of something unspoken, a truth she doesn't want to admit, but can't fully hide. Psychologically, comparison is inevitable, but when it enters a relationship after betrayal, it becomes corrosive, because comparison, by nature, steals presence from the moment. Instead of engaging with you authentically, she's filtering her experience of you through the memory of someone else. And even if she never names it, you can feel it. You can feel when you're not being received for who you are, but evaluated against an invisible measuring stick you never agreed to. Philosophically, this is where love and desire reveal their fragility. Love is strongest when it is wholehearted, when someone chooses you without reservation. But when comparison creeps in, wholeheartedness fractures, desire becomes conditional. Love becomes filtered through the lens of better and worse, rather than rooted in the acceptance of you. And that shift changes everything. Because intimacy cannot survive in the shadow of comparison. It needs exclusivity, not only of body but of attention, of admiration, of choice. This is why men often describe a gut-level pain when they sense their woman has been with someone else. It's not just about the physical act. It's about the sudden feeling of being diminished. It's the subtle awareness that you're no longer seen as enough, that someone else has been added to the silent equation, and now you are being unconsciously measured against them. That feeling of being less than corrodes a man's spirit far more deeply than the betrayal itself. And here's the truth. You can't compete with comparison. The more you try, the more you lose. Because once you step into that game, you're no longer living in authenticity. You're living in performance. You start adjusting yourself to meet unspoken standards, to outdo an invisible rival, and in doing so, you abandon your own center. You begin to betray yourself in order to regain what was already betrayed. That is a battle you cannot win. The only path forward, when you feel the weight of comparison, is to stand firm in your own worth, to recognize that if someone is dividing their attention, if they are filtering you through the memory of someone else, that is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It is a reflection of their lack of clarity. Because true intimacy requires a decision. It requires choosing one reality fully, not dabbling in multiple, and pretending it's sustainable. So when you notice this unspoken language of comparison, the criticisms, the dissatisfaction, the silence, you must ask yourself, is this the kind of love I want to accept? Because love that is filtered through contrast is not love in its pure form. It is conditional, unstable, and ultimately unfulfilling. The strength of a man is not in competing with ghosts, but in recognizing when he is being compared and refusing to play along. You are not meant to be measured against another man's shadow. You are meant to be chosen fully, without hesitation, without condition. Anything less is not intimacy, it is pretense. And here's the empowering perspective. When you walk away from comparison, you reclaim your dignity. You stop living in reaction to someone else's divided attention, and you begin to live from the authority of your own presence. You remind yourself that you don't need to win a silent competition you never agreed to. Because real love is never a competition, it is a choice. At the end of the day, the most devastating betrayal is not just that she gave herself to someone else. It's that she allowed you to feel the weight of being measured against him. And the only antidote to that is clarity, to know that you are not here to compete, but to be chosen. Because love, when it is real, does not compare. And if comparison is present, then love has already left.